this horrible experience, but like also it wasn't us.
Which is, I should say, a good reason to know your counterpart at other organizations, whether they're nearby or not, because it's always nice to be able to call them up and say, hey, before you comment.
Yeah.
When I was at the New York Historical Society, we had that problem with the Museum of the City of New York. It's just people were incessantly confused. So one solution we came up with was we were all, very frequently posting about the same on this day kind of content on this day in New York history. So we just started collaborating on those. So we had similar content, but we would supplement. So we wouldn't, they would give information about, if it was an artist's birthday or something, they would give information about the person and we would give information about the work. And then we would tell people, learn more about this from the other person's page, to kind of have our content talk to each other. A few of our dedicated followers started picking up on it. It wasn't super successful, but at least it offered people two types of information, and we reduced redundancy.
And I like the idea of not trying to like cannibalize your audiences, because it's more of a like, oh, if you like us, you'll probably also like them, because there is so much overlap between those two institutions. So I actually really like that idea.
Yeah. I think maybe another type of branding issue that maybe isn't a dual museum situation is if a museum is expanding or adding some new named part to their museum. So at my museum, we were adding a huge outdoor area that had a very large new name. So this it's literally called the Riley Children's Health Sports Legends Experience. I'll just say it. It's ridiculous. Yeah. And it was branded all over the place. It literally looked like a second actual area, like a whole other almost amusement park. But I think part of the issue is also having the social media manager in the room when a lot of these branding decisions are being made, so that you're thinking of the online user experience and even the on-site user experience when, so there isn't confusion, so that, when it comes down to it and it's open, then the marketers aren't like, oh, wait, how are we talking about ourselves now? Are we now the museum and the sports experience? And then what is the overall campus called? You have to really be thinking about these things. And often it's those of us online who are thinking of geotags and how we articulate ourselves in a tweet that can really think about things differently. So yeah, I think that's just another way that if we all don't maybe have a counterpart right across the hall, that maybe like additions like that might be another issue some of us have come upon. So,
and I didn't even touch on this, but the Smithsonian American Art Museum has a satellite museum that doesn't include the name Smithsonian or American Art in it. It's called the Renwick Gallery. It's up until about 5 years ago, it was this sleepy little place that almost nobody went to, and then we had a couple of exhibitions that people loved, which is great, but a branding issue that we never thought we'd have, we now have, and it's up to leadership to figure it out. And in the meantime, I'm kind of in a holding pattern online. So I actually walked into the museum, which is what we call SAM and MPG, one day, and didn't realize that two people were there trying to go to the Renwick, and were really confused. And it's not something that I think most of us were aware of. So
yeah, Portrait Gallery's never accidentally tagged as Renwick, actually. No. So that was like one thing that they did not confuse us with. But also working with Amy was really helpful, because we had like all of our print ephemera that ends up on the desks. If it's something that's joint, like we have conversation about like whose logo goes first. And then we also have to have kind of standard social language for some of our joint programming that we do. And I think at one point you were kind of leaning more towards using a handle, and we were leaning more towards using a hashtag. And it was because our handles were all different on different platforms. We're like, we don't want to put 3 different handles on here. And that all kind of, if we get there.
Nope.
Okay. But anyone else before we move on? We've only got a couple minutes left. Okay, cool. So, takeaways. We recognize that not everybody has exactly that issue, but it sounds like plenty of people have something similar. So as much as we can as social media managers advocate to other departments that internal divisions, departments and silos don't mean anything to visitors. And our goal, I don't know if you've noticed, but we didn't actually put our like analytics for all of these campaigns in here. Our goal wasn't numbers or to go viral. It was basically to try a few things and build a case for more continued collaboration in the future.
Yeah, we were trying to model collaboration for our colleagues in some ways. And in some ways, I think it worked. And others, it just depends on who you're working with.
Because we did have kind of some healthy and some unhealthy competition between the two institutions. And yeah, I think overall we think it was pretty successful. It was also a lot of fun. It was a bright spot in my job and a bright spot on Twitter, I feel like. Yeah. So we actually, if anyone's interested, we kind of want to do the museum movie marathon again this winter. I think we're thinking of like December 6th as a kickoff. Yep. So if you're interested, please join in or tweet us, stay in touch. We always want to hear about other ways of creative problem solving, especially when it comes to social media and our online audiences. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. It was a lot of like, don't let the directors yell at each other. We're fine. I have them in my room, but I can bring them. Yeah, I can bring them. Yeah, yeah. No, I have them. I actually found my other pair. So yeah. I thank you so much for that. It saved me yesterday. How do you find them?
Well, I would love that. What a good idea. I had to take a mental break. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been coherent. I still may not be. That cord might work. I don't know whose that is, but let's see if that one will fit in my version of Mac. Here. I don't know whose it is. Yeah. I don't have this kind of adapter. I have this. Where's my thing? I have this thing that fits in this computer, but
I will go get you one for HDMI.
okay.
HDMI or Thunderbolt?
Do I have an HDMI?
No, you have a Thunderbolt?
Oh, Thunderbolt. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Which is the
Yeah.
that one.
I think I have one of the HDMI at home, but I never know. Cool, thank you.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom really fast.
Do it.
These are all four of these people are speaking. Here, why don't you set up your own thing?
I'm Lucy.
Alright, ready for me?
There goes. Thank you.
Check, check. I don't know which one this one is. Check, check, check. Not that one. Check, check, check. That's that one.
Do you mind tossing this trash? Thank you so much. Yes, that's mine. That's mine. Ooh, I do want a water.
Tonight we're going to combine.
And I'm going to do kind of our intro, like.
Yeah.
One thing that's nice is you have the wireless mic. I'll be grabbing it and handing it to the audience. Yeah, there's nothing in this space here. But yeah, it should go.
Okay, we're ready?
Yeah, whenever you're ready, we should go.
Okay, so you want me to do this and then the second and the first one?
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome. I think we're all feeling a little burnout right now. I don't know about you, but I feel like I've been dragged behind a car. So forgive my appearance. My name is Katie Smith, and I'm from the state of North Carolina, so you'll probably notice my southern drawl. And this is a topic that we've heard a lot about since we've been here. I don't know how many of you have been in several sessions, I think, this week, and even at the Ignite talks that talk about burnout. I don't think this is necessarily something that's specific to museum industry, tech industry. I think it's society in general. We're all feeling it. And so I am joined today by some wonderful people. So over here we have Claire Lanier with the Metropolitan Museum of Art, who is part of the social media manager. We have Linda Kelly, who is a consultant and wonderful to hear from. She's been in the biz for a long time. And then we have Lucy, who also has been in the biz for a long time and now a consultant. And so how this... Oh, yeah, and I'm Katie Smith. So I'm the chief content officer for the state of North Carolina for the department that oversees natural and cultural resources. And so how this came to be was there's a Facebook group for museum social media managers. And so I had posted a tweet, and we'll show you that tweet in a second, that someone had tweeted about mental health and social media managers. And I think this is something that's kind of whispered about but doesn't come up often. And a lot of this came off of the article that came out about the people who work for Facebook and have to preview content that comes in, and how it really messes with you. Like getting inundated with this stuff all day, being on 24/7. And so you kind of start feeling just overwhelmed on so many levels. So we wanted to say a disclaimer, we are not mental health professionals. So what we're going to talk about today is our perspective of burnout and what that means to us, because I think every person in here has a very unique perspective on burnout. What might be burnout for me may not be for you, and so that's something that we wanted to personalize. So we may repeat some things, but I think it's worth repeating because I think it helps for everyone to hear that you're not alone in this and that it's things that we all feel and we can share. We decided not to do Chatham House rules on this session. However, some of the things we'll be talking about might be sensitive and, like I said, personal stories to us and to share to y'all in this room today. So we just keep that in the back of your mind. And so what I'm going to do now is pass the mic to Lucy, who's going to kick off this session.
Does this sound good? Okay. whatever your unique quirks and personal cocktail of experience is, your quirks, your strengths, and shortcomings may be, we are all susceptible to burnout. Creative types, athletes, computer programmers, analysts, artists, etc. In this world of information overload, it is common and easy to get overwhelmed and burn out. So what is burnout? I'll let you read the following slides with some quotes from articles that we read during our research, but I'm not going to read everything out loud because I'm also going to concurrently share my own experience with burnout with you. And in preparing for this presentation and doing some of the reading and thinking about the topic, I realized that I've experienced burnout more than once, and I might be a little burned out right now. So I started my career at the Metropolitan Museum in 2009, and then I moved over. I worked there for 5 years and moved to LACMA and did LACMA for 2 years in-house. And I was enticed away to an agency that was offering me more competitive pay, a higher title, and they had for-profit clients, including Art Basel. And pretty quickly in my experience with that agency, there was a lot of pressure, a lot of internal factors, and several external factors going on in my personal life that started to make me feel like it wasn't the right decision and that I made a mistake. And then I convinced myself that I would never work in museums again, and I ruined my career. And I got to the point where I was just completely burnt out, and I was like, pretty much, I got in the position where I forced myself to leave the position because I just was too overtaxed with it, and those kind of issues that were surrounding that disillusion and disappointment and self-abuse. So to share my story, like my recovery, I guess the way that I ended up resolving that issue was some mental health professional help and going out as a consultant, and I got an opportunity pretty early on to do a freelance project, and that enabled me to start my consulting practice and start to make my own schedule and be a little selective about clients, although I have never said no. And I know many of you are in-house, and not everyone can leave their secure jobs, and not everyone wants to do the independent consulting thing, so I'm not saying that's the actual solution for this. But I have to say that it's a constant day-to-day challenge and practice that you have to kind of keep up. So here is that tweet that Katie mentioned. I feel as people who work in social media engagement, we don't talk nearly enough about how deeply it affects our mental health. Here are all the responsibilities that social media managers take on as a single role, or sometimes a team of 2 or 3, but still it's an endless amount of work. Like there's just so much that can be done and so much that needs to be done that it's sometimes hard to kind of zoom out and understand like your limitations, and you want to do everything but literally cannot. So we're gonna share some other examples of the issues that we combat in museum social media management. This was just a slide that I dropped in from my experience working with the Getty. There is a subset of people that believes there are child slaves being captured under the Getty and being eaten by carnivores, and it's part of the Pizzagate controversy. And so on social media, they're constantly getting messages about this, and their rightful solution is not to respond, because who entertains that kind of weird shit? But it is something that like taxes you if you're seeing this constantly. And I think if you were in the ethics panel or the ethics deep dive earlier, you would have seen other examples of that kind of constant social media bombardment. And as social media managers, we really have to kind of take it with a grain of salt, protect ourselves, and try not to let it get to us, even though it inevitably does. Burnout is a problem in all sectors, but nonprofit workers can be especially vulnerable to workplace fatigue. and that's a thing. That's also a point elaborated in the next slide. We're all passionate about what we do, and like I said, we want to do everything, but we just can't. So another slide about what is burnout. Takes an incredible amount of brilliance and bravery to create and write thousands of pieces of content per year, and for each and every one on the internet for it to be critiqued. So we do get feedback from our followers, and we see all that day to day. And it just amounts to like an overwhelming pressure on an individual that we need to kind of really recognize and examine. So here are some solutions that I want to put forth. You are the best and sometimes your only advocate. Focusing on and advocating for your own work-life balance is essential for communications and social media professionals and the workforce at large. So here are a few things that I think you can do for yourself to communicate with your manager and the senior leadership of your institution to avoid or prevent burnout. A lot of documentation, making sure that you're communicating the volume of work that you're doing, and looking at that workload yourself and examining what, and prioritizing what you're doing first, second, third, and what needs to be deprioritized, what you need to let go or delay until you have the time and space and energy to do it. Let's see. And then my last point is that I want to make personally is that it's okay. It happens. It's happening to all of us. I think we've all shared some of our experiences with burnout, and we can commiserate together. And it's nice to be a part of a community that's honest and open about this kind of stuff. Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. Accept support that is offered. Take control of your mental health. And Claire's going to address this a little bit later, but self-care is not the only solution, and it is now identified as a systemic issue within our field. So I think that perhaps coming out of this conference, we can all hopefully put our heads together and think of other solutions that senior leadership can become aware of it, and we can advocate for ourselves and each other and our staff if we manage someone directly. So that's me. I want to say.
Okay. So I'm going to channel Leslie Knope. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Parks and Recreation, but I have been in government for over a decade. I sound like I'm part of a support group. And so I've been in yeah, I know, right? I'm Katie. I work for government. I've been in state, local government for over a decade, and there kind of sometimes is a stereotype of government employees being kind of lazy, doing mediocre, but in my experience, that's not necessarily true. A lot of times we are tasked with things that are above our pay grade, and I think this is for a lot of people, and we also experience burnout. And so what I want to talk with y'all today about is specifically what burnout looks like in government, which might be a little bit different than like some of the things that we talked about. So the first thing going against us is we are rated the top most annoying industry on social media. People typically are not happy with government. We are an easy target. So I kind of go into my mindset of no matter what we post on our social media channels, we're always going to have somebody who doesn't like it, who has a huge concern about what we're doing with their money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what that means is that early on when I first I got into social media, I would take it really personal. Like, people would say stuff and I would be like, I'm a person behind this. Please don't yell at me. I have nothing to do with that. And especially in North Carolina, I don't know if you guys are familiar with HB2, which was the bathroom law. When that was happening, anything we posted, immediately hundreds of comments. And I would be like, we're just a science museum. Like, we have nothing to do, we honestly had nothing to do with the policy regarding that. I understood that that was their experience, and I think they had every right to comment, but it was very difficult. The second thing that I experienced in the last 2 years was we were in the news about Confederate monuments. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. Our state was dealing a lot with that. And part of my job was filtering comments that came up, especially about our public comments. We had to filter public comments from everyone about the Confederate monuments. And I'll never forget the day we had to download them. And I read through thousands of comments. And when I say it is like the deep-seated worst part of people, because one, they thought they were anonymous, they weren't, and secondly, I just couldn't believe what people were saying, and I just thought, I don't get paid enough to do this. Like, I was sitting here thinking, and I remember I went home and I literally just closed my door and watched Bake Off for 4 hours because I was like, I cannot even deal with this right now. Like, because I was angry, I was sad, like I was having all these emotions. And at the same time, every day our inboxes, I would wake up and it would be comment after comment after comment of people just angry and upset. And I'm like, I get it. Like, I understand why you're upset. Like, and number one, we don't agree with these things. No one that I worked with agreed with them. But we were in a situation with government, there's policy, there's paperwork. The way that they do it isn't the typical way that you do it. On top of that, I can't block people. I see this a lot where people are like, well, just block them if you don't like what they say. I can't because of laws and policies, public record laws, Freedom of Information Acts. Like, so when you have government, like, you can't just say, I don't like you, you no longer cease to exist in my world. We don't have that luxury, which means I am commonly interacting with regular trolls to the point where I'm like, oh, they're back, like clockwork. I know when they're going to come in. And one of the things that really came to me was, and this is what I tell people all the time, trolls can also be real people. And so I was dealing with an individual, and I'll never forget, I walked into a meeting, and they were sitting at the table, this person, who then went on to berate everybody at the table, and it was like a real life comment section of a Facebook happening in a meeting. And I was just looking at my coworker like, is this happening? Like, is this for real? Is this person in the room? Because they had set up, had the ability to communicate with people because they felt they weren't being heard on social media. They took to the next step. Were they able to do that? Yes. Was it really bothering me? Yes, because like this person knew who I was, that I was a real person, and now they're yelling at me in person. Like, well, what do I do? And so on top of all of this, when I took the job, I didn't realize really what I was getting into. And so I always joke about the I'm okay, but I'm drowning. We have over 200 social media accounts under our department agency. On top of this, I became the social media hall monitor, which meant I also was putting out fires, not only our own fires, but other fires. Honestly, my water tank was running low. I was just over my head. And my boss sat down and, she was like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm good. And she was like, no, really, how are you? And I was like, I'm good. And she's like, no. Like, and I was like, honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do, because I said, I feel like, this is a layered cake of here I am trying to do my best with what little resources I have. On top of that is like my own inability to say no, because we live in this society of scarcity where everyone's told you're not enough, you don't have enough, you need to be enough. But the truth is, you are enough, right? And then layered on that was imposter syndrome. Well, I don't really need to be here, so I need to do more to prove myself, And she looked at me, and I'll never forget, she said to me, she goes, I don't want you to just get by, I want you to thrive. And it was like this light bulb went off, and she said, let's meet and figure out how we can make this work. And so what we did was we came up with a plan, and Ryan talked a little about this, Ryan Dodge talked about this in another session, about really thinking of how you can communicate to people above you, what you do in your job, and how much more you can get done with the resources that you need. With all that said, I also kind of have my own things that I had to do in my own life to avoid burnout. One of those is set boundaries. So I turned off all the notifications on my phone. I try not to answer emails off the clock. It's hard. I'm not perfect at this. And try to be more thoughtful about how I use my own personal time. I invested in those glasses that help when you're reading screens, which has been a lifesaver because I was getting horrible headaches and I couldn't figure out why. Get up and move, go to the kitchen, talk to people, don't isolate yourself, structure your time. I went to my boss and I said, I work better at night. Would it be possible for me to leave early, pick up my kid, and then get work done at home? And she was like, yes, whatever you need to do. So those are the type of things you think about. Some other things I've done is I deleted apps. So I couldn't do this for our accounts, but personally, I got off Twitter for about 4 months, and it was literally the best thing I ever did, just to kind of detox, get away from it all. And then delegate. So I was really bad about taking tasks that I felt I had to do and not putting them on my employees. And using project management tools like Trello and things like that, I'm starting to like delegate tasks out and take that off of my plate. And then what I tell a lot of people is don't put all your time into social media account or social media platforms that aren't serving you. Don't spend tons of time on YouTube. Don't spend tons of time on Instagram until you're ready and you have the time to do that. That can wait. That's not a big deal. So these are some of the things from government is that, we have this extra layer of taxpayers that are very upset about things. And so on top of all of that, we're trying to deal with it and then keep your own sanity. So with all that said, that is my personal experience. But when this is done, just keep telling yourself you are enough, you're doing the best you can, and you're going to thrive.
You're only one person, and it's your one and only life.
Yes.
Hi. Okay, so I'm from Sydney, and I've been in the museum sector since 1987, so figure out how old I am. And I've kind of coming from a bit of a different perspective because, as you can see here, burnout isn't a new problem, and I've seen that in my whole long career of people overworked, feeling passionate about their jobs, wanting to be on 24/7. And this was before social media, before even computers and that kind of stuff. I used to see it in my workplace all the time. And when I started at the Australian Museum, and I never worked 7 days a week and stuff like that, but it just sucked you in because that's what everybody did. And that was a really cool job. And so that's just what you did. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that it's not a new problem, but it's probably a bigger problem because I think the way the world is, it's so fast and everything's 24/7 that it's just become worse. So that's just something there. And if you could just... So, I was at the Australian Museum and then I got made redundant from there, which was a bad thing because I'd been there for 27 years. But it was also a good thing because I got some payout and was able to do something. And my partner at the time got his divorce settlement. So I was like, well, let's just buy something and invest and have it for later on. Then I worked at the Maritime Museum for 3.5 years and I loved it there. I was initially contracted for 2 and then they kept asking me and I said, well, okay, that's fine. But the second time of the contract, I said, look, I really need to finish up. The reason was because I was in a position where I was the head of learning and audience research, and my remit was we've got to move all these people into more of a digital mindset. And while the majority of people were fantastic, there were 2 people that really just wouldn't do it. They wouldn't even move desks without some drama. So it was not a great situation for me. And when you kind of end up at the hospital thinking you're going to have a heart attack because of all the things that were going on at work, you just didn't want to go. It was terrible. And my partner, he was like in a high pressure sales job and we just said, fuck this. We need to make a change in our lives. So we decided we bought this little property and we decided we're just moving out of Sydney and we're going to go it alone. So he finished work. He doesn't get paid, so I'm now the breadwinner for the household, which brings another set of stresses, and I went out into consulting. So this is kind of, just before we move on, that's my office there. So I do a lot of work, online focus groups, which is great because you can do it while you're having a glass of wine and look out the window.
Big glass of wine, Linda.
We grow garlic, and commercially, kind of semi-commercially. So we provide restaurants around our area, and we grow award-winning tomatoes from the Robertson Show, champion fruit, and we make sausages. So we just decided to make a complete change in our lives to help our own mental health, and just to see if we could do it. And if I could just get the next slide, thanks, Lucy. So I really had to think about, well, what we say in our household is that every day is a Sunday, but every day is a Monday. So you don't really get a break when you're an independent consultant. Like Lucy said, I have to say yes to everything, and I have to make a certain amount of money a month so that we can keep going. And that's okay, we've decided to do that. But I also thought that I needed to really start thinking about how am I going to be productive? How am I going to have that work-life balance? Because when you're on your own as a consultant, you don't get those boundaries. Like Katie was talking about, you can sit down with your boss and say, well, we're going to do this. Well, I sit down with my boss, my partner, and it's like, well, how much money have you made this month? We have a lack of sales meeting. That's okay. I get him back and say, well, how many beans have you grown this month? We have a lack of produce meeting. So I kind of doodled around and thought, well, how can I do this? And I've never been one for lists. I've always quite a digital person. I never usually write stuff down, but I learned having a book, ticking things off, being more productive. So I found this nice site that said, you know, how do you be more productive? Well, you create lists, you diaritise tasks, you go for a walk when you need to, even if it's just to the letterbox. And I'm lucky because the letterbox in our house is a long way away from our house, so that's a pretty good walk. Or I go and pick peas, or go and play with the ducks, or water the plants. So it's just things about how to get back to nature and also eating well and that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of that goes out of the wayside when people are feeling very burnt out. It's like you tend to binge on chocolates and cakes and bake-offs. So I think that that's helped as well. So doing those lists and being more productive. The other two things I'm going to mention is I always make every year 3 goals, a professional goal, a personal goal, 3 professional goals, 3 personal goals, and 3 financial goals. So the professional goals for me are really about, well, let's get some new clients, let's get some new projects, let's do this. My financial goal is, okay, I have to make, and it's up there, I have to make $5,000 a month. So that's easy, is making the money. It's actually getting the clients to pay, which is the problem. So, yeah. And then your financial target should always be a stretch target. So if I say I need to make $5,000 a month, well, why don't I just bump it up and try and make 7? And then there's a personal goal, and this was a bit hard because I'm a little bit isolated. We live in the country, so it's a bit of a drive to get to the local gym. But I thought, no, stuff it. I just need to do that. So I've made time for that, and I was going to do a couple of challenges there, but the problem was that we didn't like the recipes that you had to follow to get healthy, so stuff that. I'm not giving up pasta for anybody. And then my other personal goal was use a slotted spoon more. That's just crazy. And I've just realised you can all see my SurveyMonkey login, but anyway. The other thing I did on the left, so if you want to use my account, it's called a jar of joy, and one of my friends posted this, and she said, just, any simple thing, just write it on a note and shove it in a jar. And at the end of the year, get it all out and have a look and see, wow, I've actually done heaps. And it might be something as simple as, the first pumpkins have come up, or our ducks have started laying eggs again. Or it can be, oh, wow, I've got a contract for this, or we've won a tender for that, or whatever, or our proposal got accepted for MCN. So it's just kind of a way to kind of remind yourself that there's some really great things, and at the end of the year, you get it all out. You go, wow, this is pretty good. And then you do your jar again. So that's just some ideas about trying to look after yourselves and have a bit of self-care. And I know that there's a big discussion about, well, who is responsible? But for me, at the end of the day, we're all responsible for our own health, life, whatever. So sometimes if you need to take the step, I encourage you, if you can and you can afford it, just go for it, because it was a really good move for us.
Okay, so speaking of whose problem is this, I'm Claire from the Met. Hi. I want to look at burnout from an accountability standpoint. I think we're always our first inclination is, I'm disorganized, I'm not managing my time appropriately, I'm not using the right productivity tools, I'm I must be the problem here. So I think it's helpful to look at this from a really wide lens. So the first person who's accountable is our culture, obviously. Last year, the sort of famously, the DSM added burnout to the list of real medical conditions, and that's kind of caused a resurgence of discussion about burnout and what work is. And we know that this is pervasive in our culture across industries. One theory behind where this comes from Derek Thompson, who wrote a great piece in The Atlantic. I recommend reading it. And it talks about a lot of different things, but it focuses on this idea of workism. Essentially, when we had a more faith-based society, communities were really finding their self-value and worth in whatever their faith communities were. And now that we're in a much more secular society, we don't really have that higher power or other entity to give us that. And so work has sort of become our religion. And I think it hits the nail on the head, I think, for a lot of people. Obviously, that's not going to be true for everyone. But we tend to wrap up our self-value and worth in our work, and that creates a really complicated relationship with it. And of course, that's exacerbated when you work for a nonprofit or a mission-based organization where your passion is supposed to fuel a lot of the work you do. And then when you start to resent it, you start to resent your passion. And that creates a really big, uncomfortable disconnect in what you're doing. So the second person who's responsible is our organizations, of course. I showed a picture of Google because, Google famously offers all these amenities to their employees, food, and I don't know. I don't work for Google. I don't know what all of them are. Massages, all right. Nap pods, even, awesome. And that's all well and good, but we have to question what that's in service to. All of that allows their employees to never leave campus and basically live and work more. A friend of mine, her brother-in-law works for Palantir, and they actually offer you a bonus if you live within like a certain distance. They'll give you, the closer you live to work, the more amenities are available to you, and that's like super fucked up, that's not okay to incentivize that kind of lifestyle. And so it really behooves us to look at what our organizations are offering us and really question what is behind that. And I think self-care is one area where that gets really cloudy. Certainly organizations will say, we're gonna start offering yoga or meditation or committees to talk about this. But are we really offered the space to participate in those, or is it just extending our day even further? If we take place in that yoga class, does that mean we're staying until 8 to actually finish our work? Where something's got to give at some point, and so where is that give? Maybe there's forced comp time. We were talking about comp time structures earlier. What is the official philosophy on comp time at your organization? I know most places I've worked, it's a very unofficial policy. It's like, keep track of your hours and let me know if you ever earned an extra day, and we'll keep it off the books. And that can be really challenging to track. So it's a good opportunity to talk about the limitations of self-care. Anne Helen Peterson wrote, for many of us, it's like a seminal article on millennial burnout that came out earlier this year. I really recommend reading it. It's super long and super illuminating. But one thing she talks about is the limitation of self-care. And I see two real issues with self-care, and some of this is coming from her, of course, too. The first is it's a lot of pressure. When you're busy as hell all the time, now you got to think about your meditation schedule, you got to think about your apps, you got to think about your yoga, all the carrots you're eating, it's exhausting. And then you have a whole other layer of guilt that you're not keeping up with the self-care scope. And you got to look at it on Instagram and see all these gorgeous, beautiful people who never get stressed out and their hair always looks good and whatever. It's really hard to keep up with. So it instills another level of guilt. But it also, you also have to question the motives of self-care and the industry as a whole. If self-care is just in service to you becoming a more efficient worker, that's not really self-care. That's just oiling the car so that it runs better. All of that is ultimately then in service to your work performance. And so self-care in its truest form should function as a way for you to be a healthier human being, separate from the work that you're doing. So questioning what your self-care, routine is significant when we're thinking about ourselves from a labor perspective. So I encourage you to question that and then feel okay if you're not really keeping up with what you should be doing from a self-care standpoint. So next, it's our boss's problem. Of course, our supervisors hold a huge responsibility in our schedules and the work that we do. I think, if you can go to the next slide. To me, this brings up a lot of core issues surrounded by burnout. Obviously, there's a lot of things that contribute to burnout, but a few things that rise to the top for me. One thing that I've noticed I've been doing social media management for museums for about 8 years, and for every supervisor I've had has never actually managed social media. Or if they did, it was maybe 10 or 12 years ago. Facebook was founded in, 2003. So the whole industry is only under 20 years old anyway. So it's not surprising that the people who are managing us don't necessarily have a real grasp on what it takes, compounded by the fact that the platforms are changing all of the time. So even if someone managed social media 5 years ago, Instagram stories was not part of their workflow. And anyone who works in social media knows the perception versus reality of what it takes to put together an Instagram story is a huge gap. And I think even for really well-meaning supervisors who think that work takes, oh yeah, I know you're putting a lot of effort, it must have taken you like at least a half an hour. That takes days, that takes hours to sit there and put together quality content. So there's a huge, huge gap between the actual work that we're doing and what's perceived. And that also can create a lack of recognition, which is certainly something that contributes to burnout when you feel like all the work that you're doing is for naught. I mean, I had a boss who didn't even have social media accounts the entire time I worked there. And so every time I would show her a success, it was kind of like, oh, look how cute, that worked, like, congratulations. That is super condescending and super demeaning when you're a professional person. And that same boss, when I left, actually said, we should sit down and talk because I really have no idea what you do all day. And I think that's another thing that happens when we're working in these isolated roles. If we're doing our jobs well and not setting off major fires on social media, we kind of evaporate into the background. And it's not until there's some crisis that they're like, oh, how did you fuck this up? And then it's really rises to the top. And that's super, super stressful as well. So that can be really complicated. And then I think one more other thing is this pride factor. And that the pride factor is really used against us so much. We have pride in the institutions that we represent, we have pride in the work that we do, and very often when we're faced with working an extra hour because of the pride and significance of our work or going home, we're choosing that first option, and that is not sustainable in any way. And then, like I said, we resent our passion. And then finally, it's our problem, for sure. And I definitely don't mean this from a, find a better productivity tool, figure out your work schedule. We know there's probably tweaks that all of us can make all the time to our workflow and everything that we're doing. But I think maybe there's a few other options of things that we can try from a personal standpoint. So I called this impossible things we need to try, because I'm sure we can read all of these and be like, I can't do that at my job. There's always a billion reasons to be like, this is not going to work. But sometimes it's worth it to give it a go. So one thing that I try is not working overtime outside the office. A lot of people, this is not something that they can do. I'm single with no life, so I can work until 9 p.m. Sometimes. But if there's an event that we're covering after hours, I could very easily work on the coverage for that Instagram story on the subway, on my ride home, or when I get home and while I'm watching The Office or whatever. But that's really not an accurate indication of my work. So I really try to actually do all the work in the office. And then it's really easy for me to tell, oh my gosh, I worked until 9, 4 days this week, because I was there clocking those hours. I think the benefit of digital work is that you can take it everywhere, but it's also the downside, and it becomes really, really muddy about when we are actually working. Turn off the features that, if you turn off Facebook Messenger, you got to do what you got to do, and if managing that and fielding that kind of inquiry is not sustainable and not something that you can do, then you just have to say no to it. You just have to not do it, and that can be really challenging. The benefit is if your boss isn't really aware of social media and its needs, it's easy to have control over that, and you can argue well for it. But I think if Instagram stories are too much of a lift, then you just can't do it. And the person whose problem it is to manage that is your supervisors, not necessarily yours. Saying no, obviously, is a super easier said than done tactic, but I think it also behooves us to really say no. A lot of times it's really easy to say no. It's like, programs team wants you to publicize an event that the photo is super bad and it's not going to perform well and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's easy to say no to that. But I think it's harder to really set boundaries, setting standards and then really holding to them. If people have to give you the content 48 hours in advance or whatever it is, if they violate whatever standard that you've set up, it behooves us to really hold to that, because otherwise there's no point in that guideline, and then we're still picking up the slack. So really saying no even when it's uncomfortable. I think we're really inclined to use workload as a point of pride. Part of it is this workism thing. Someone recently in the cafeteria said like, "Oh God, I worked 60 hours last week," and I don't know what we're all trying to accomplish with that. I think we do feel like, I'm putting in so much time, and everybody should know that. But we also, it's manipulative for ourselves too. Like it's not a point of pride that we had to work that many hours. It really shouldn't be, and we set a really weird standard when we talk about work in that way. So really avoiding that glorification of killing yourself for your job. I think refusing to carry the mental load is the same, in many ways, saying the same thing as saying no, but also ensuring you have a backup. It can be really hard to fight for that when you're a one-person team. And I think someone else was talking about that, it's hard to give over the reins to someone who's also not trained in this. But I think it's really, really important to demand a backup. And if you need to be the one to provide training, to hold, maybe it's regular training about, how to respond to comments or when to respond to comments or what kind of stuff to post, then that might require a little bit more of a lift on the front end, but it's really significant to have someone to back you up, because it's totally unsustainable as a single person. And I know tons of people who it puts you in tears. It's so frustrating to work alone in this space. And being upfront, that's really where our responsibility is. If our supervisor isn't aware of the amount of time that it takes to put all this stuff together, we have a responsibility to tell them what that time is. And I think probably a lot of people are okay with that and are looking for what the actual number is. If it did take you 3 hours to put together the Instagram story, like that's part of that plan. If you're putting it together for an exhibition, that's stuff that we have to account for. And if we don't tell them, they're never going to know. And it also sends this very weird implication that our job can be done in 40 hours when actually it's taking us 80 hours. And we're setting back the entire industry when we're giving the impression that we can take this on. Again, all of these are easier said than done, but maybe it's a constant thing that we're practicing. I think sometimes it's also about just accepting that you're bad at your job, or what feels like you're bad at your job. When you have to make that choice of like, well, it would really be good if I put in an extra 45 minutes to do X, but I'm just going to not do that. I'm just going to be, and it's really uncomfortable. I think social media managers in particular are control freaks because we have to be, because if we make a typo, the entire internet is just going to yell at us, which has happened since I worked at the Met, and it was terrible. And I think we just have to choose to be bad at our job sometimes and be okay in that space of mediocrity if it means that we're able to have some sanity for the day.
I want to contribute that old adage, done is better than good.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
And the thing is, we have to float this up. So if we're having to post less or having to make these decisions, people above us need to figure this out. They need to figure out the money and the workload and everything. It's not our job to kill ourselves for this work. Even when it feels like it. And I recommend complaining. I found that to be extremely effective. In my old job, I complained every day for 3 years that I had too much work, and that I had the job of 2 people. And after 3 years, they split my job into two different positions, and it was very effective, and I was very annoying about it. And I think it works. Unfortunately, then I got a job at the Met and didn't reap the benefits of that at all. But Emily did, so it all works. Yeah, exactly.
To add to that, one of the things I did is sometimes I think when like our supervisors don't always realize exactly what we're doing all day. So last year I decided to screenshot every comment we had, print it out, and put it in a folder. And I gave it to her, and it was about this thick, and she was just going through it like, this is so ridiculous. And I'm like, I know, this is what I've been trying to tell you. Like, this is what I'm dealing with every day. And it wasn't even questions for our department. It was like, I saw somebody illegally dumping sewage. And I have to help these people, right? Like, I can't just be like, hey, wrong department, sorry. Like, so after, so I think really like put in perspective that when you go and not only complain, because that does work sometimes, make it make sense to them where you're I literally screenshot every single nasty comment, every single question, every single thing that I was dealing with every day going, this is what my time is consumed by, and her going, okay, you need help. So those are the things that you really have to put in front of them to really, make them see. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you make this decision to walk away and start a new adventure, So those are decisions you personally have to make.
Yeah, and also, if you're a supervisor, it's your responsibility to think about this too. I think it's significant to be asking this question, are you burned out, how's your workload? And it's not a once a year at your review question, it's not a twice a year at your informal review, it's a very regular, burnout is not something you just arrive at, it's like a thing that we deal with regularly, and avoiding it is a practice. It's not a one solution. So if you, like the comp time thing, like if you're supervising someone, you can't tell them like one time, like, hey, don't forget to use your comp time. Like, you have to be putting that in their mindset all the time, because it's uncomfortable to go to your boss all the time and be like, hey, I worked another extra 20 hours this week. I need 3 days off or whatever it is. People will just not do it. We know that. We have there's so many stats about people not taking their time. And so you have to remind people regularly and create space for them. And then my last point was just really giving yourself the benefit of emphasizing the good. I mean, all the negative comments stick out more, but sometimes I will just kind of go through and read oh, hey, I love this post, or great work or whatever. That's helpful. That's very, very helpful. And also, I would recommend reaching out to other institutions and other social media managers. Oh, great post! I love this. This must have taken forever. We do have a super supportive community, and also other brands. I've, every now and then it's fun to just shoot a message to Nike or whoever it is. They're busy too. They're stressed out as social media managers too. And everybody forgets that there is a human behind every single brand out there, even the people who do it. So it never hurts to just shower people with positivity.
We're going to open it up to audience feedback and questions in a second. I just wanted to also note that burnout can be a progressive thing, and it can compound on itself, and it can hit you before you recognize it, or you can recognize it as it's happening, or there are levels of burnout. You can be slightly burnt out, or you can be majorly burnt out. And I think that's a real litmus test that we need to always be cognizant of as we do this job.
We have a mic person. It's very official.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. I just wanted to say, first and foremost, this was probably the most cathartic session I've been in, the last 2 days. Every single thing you said resonated with me. I apparently went through burnout and didn't know it until you all were just talking about it. Not museum related. I'm actually originally from education. I didn't join this world until 7 months ago. But I worked for a private school, and I had a boss that had sort of a bad combination of needing everything from me posted within 30 seconds of it being done, but not actually being on the channels. So she had no idea what I did, and I didn't know that I was having burnout until I talked to my best friend, and I told her that I had a sinus cold, and she said, well, it's June. And I said, is that like the month for sinus colds? I don't understand your point. And apparently for 4 years straight, I'd been sick in June because it was after graduation, and I would have just spent 3 weeks with like 70 hours per week or 80 hours per week, and I had no clue that there was a pattern happening. So I moved to museums, and I feel incredibly fortunate that I have a team of people who not only get what I do, can log in and edit things or change things, and are incredibly collaborative, and even like they celebrate stuff. Like I've had colleagues come up to me and say, I saw that story last night. Great job, very informative. And I'm like, thanks, I literally did actually spend 10 minutes on that, but thank you very much. As opposed to like the ones I've actually spent hours on. But I will also agree with that concept of trying to train others of how to do things. I have colleagues who know how to handle Twitter. It's one thing I'm not super great at, both because Twitter sucks and also because it's the one place where I feel like you really can fall into a rabbit hole. And also just because Facebook, Instagram, they're all very different in a lot of different ways. So I haven't fully nailed Twitter. So when we have an event that I have to cover, someone else handles Twitter for me and I handle Instagram and Facebook. And I really do encourage you, if you have someone in your organization and they don't necessarily know how to use it, but they're still willing. I recently taught one of my colleagues how to use Instagram stories because I couldn't make the event. I didn't want to make the event. I was going to Chicago. I was taking a trip. I wanted to have a break. So I taught her how to use, she had a personal Instagram, but she had rarely used it. I taught her how to do stories. She's become a super Zoom fanatic, and now her personal feed is filled with pictures of her dog, which she uses with Super Zoom because she loves it. So there can be converts, and they can figure it out, and it doesn't have to be perfect. She didn't use, videos. She didn't create hashtags. She didn't add a ton of things, but she covered it, and it worked. So maybe just keeping that in mind. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I also thought this was a really informative session. I have like a twofold question. So I'm sure there's a lot of people like me who manage social media but also have to do many other things like write blogs and manage the site and do videos and stuff like that. So my question would be like a twofold question. Like one, how do you deal with, or how would you advise people to deal with sort of getting all the social media content out there all the time when you have to be doing other things and you don't always have stuff that can go right out on social media? What advice would you have for that? And secondly, do you ever get sort of frustrated? Let's say you do take time to build something and then it goes out on Twitter and you're like, okay, that had like a 2-minute lifespan. Like, how do you deal with that sort of like annoyance of that sort of annoying part of social media? If you could sort of, if either of those two or both of those questions.
Yeah, I'll answer first and then I'll pass it down. But I think strategy is really important to look at the big picture and strategize and prioritize, as Katie mentioned earlier, like what platforms are working for you, where is your audience, and focus there, and then and know your limits and prioritize accordingly.
So to go off of what Lucy said, so our department oversees, like I said, we have over 200 sites, and it was a mess. It was a hot mess trying to keep up with all that. So what we did is we audited our counts. We said, where are we succeeding? Where are we not succeeding? What content does well? And then we sat down and totally redid our strategy. And instead of doing like, first, let's make sure we have evergreen content that we can use at any time that we know is going to do well. We are doing what now is like just full-on open source initiatives. So what we do is we create initiatives that give other people like, come on, join us, and then we use that user-generated content, which saves me a lot of time. So we really thought about strategy and how we could save ourselves and not having to do that. We also invested in using things like MailChimp and Zapier, and we really, really critically looked at tools that are worth the money, that are going to save us time and how we're putting out content. So that's one way. And what was the second part of your question? The frustration. The frustration. Oh. Let me tell you. So we have in my small unit, we have our wall of shame and our wall of fame, and we print them out and we put them up. So we embrace it, and so in our kitchen and in the refrigerator, we actually put up all the good things that come out of it. We make sure everybody high fives. But I think for that is just learn from it, because we're not psychologists. We can't get in the human brain. So what we think is like might be really good may not be like hilarious to another group of people. So I think with that is we just learn from it and just like, just switch it off.
Yeah, something real quick. I'm sorry. And that pressure to go viral, that's such an indicator that those people do not understand the industry, because it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall and whatever sticks. People are weird and they pick the weirdest things to make viral.
So when I was head of digital at the Australian Museum, we set up all our social channels, and we did something similar to what you were talking about, was that we had an outsourced within the museum model. So we picked 5 people that we thought would be great from different areas, some from science and research, someone from conservation, someone from front of house, someone from education, and each week we'd have a stand-up meeting. Okay, well, who's going to look after this channel, blah, 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 blah. But remember, back then we didn't even have Instagram. We had Flickr. Who's on that? So we made a collegial decision to do it that way, and as the manager was kind of overseeing it, but we had a very loose kind of set of morals back then. We just did what we wanted. And just speaking about viral, we had a viral incident that I caused that caused me to get kicked off as the Facebook administrator. So, but it also told us, we learnt when to post something, because I was... Anyway, it's a long story. So, yeah, well, actually what we did was we learnt that, don't have your museum Facebook account as well as your own private Facebook on your brand new iPad, posting while you're cooking dinner, watching a stupid show on TV, and then you post, I've just spent 15 minutes watching a current affair, which is probably like some terrible news show. But and I realised I posted it as the Australian Museum. But what it actually taught us was that a post at 6:45 at night was the best time to do a Facebook post, because this post went off. And it was so funny because people were so kind of funny about it. Oh, Australian Museum, what are you doing watching a current affair? Australian Museum, quick. This was my favourite. Go read Proust. And then you got the other people saying, how dare you say current affairs? So we ended up deleting the post and I got kicked off. And that was kind of a symbolic thing in the museum. So you can go viral. But I would say in a small institution, when there's one of you, if you've got a good manager, make sure that they do know and they can give you help. And you can find other people that are really great at doing this kind of content, as long as you're managing it. So anyway.
I would say focus on one thing that you're good at. I'm not as good on Twitter, and Facebook is just like such a terrible place. Yeah, Facebook sucks. Come on. So like when I was at New York Historical and complaining every single day for 3 years, I just decided to put all my energy into Instagram. That was the bedrock of everything. I definitely treated Twitter and Facebook like ugly stepchildren, and that was just what that was. You're only one person. You have your capacity. And I also would say don't worry about redundancy. You're going to see redundancy a lot more than your followers are. We would love to think that our followers really are paying attention, but we're not competing with other museums. We're competing with every social media account that exists in their feed. So we're lucky if they're going to pick up on a single post that we're putting out. And I think you can, there's different ways to capitalize on, to use lack of redundancy. Oh, sorry, we're running out of time.
Maybe this could be the last question.
Sure. Yeah. Let me just finish.
We've got cocktail hour. We can talk about it.
Yeah. But I think, redundancy. Oh, you can use that to your advantage. Like my old colleague at the Museum of the City of New York, every single Sunday they posted a user-generated image of their one single Starlight gallery. It pretty much looked the same every single week, but people loved it. It was like a beautiful space, and so people came to rely on that, and it saved a lot of time, and it was really easy. So and like focus on your greatest hits. Like we always think that like we need to be like super unique and go behind the scenes or whatever. Like giving them like, people love Washington Crossing the Delaware at the Met. We're not going to post it all the time, but we can post it more than we think that we can. And then also like National Cat Day and all the whatever hashtag holidays, like the outside perspective is like you need to post about that to be part of the conversation, but I think the benefit of those is just gives you content ideas. Like, it's not hard to make dinner, it's hard to think of what you want for dinner. So let those guide your strategy, and it's a lot easier to plug into them. And also, so then the other thing about Twitter is like, or like a post that sucks, like, I don't know, social media is totally fickle. So I got nothing for you. Like, so much of our work is pointless, honestly, that we put stuff out there. We were just talking about it. Alexis and I, the Frick and the Met, coincidentally both posted this picture of this really cool gold lion clock that we both were like, this is cool. And she tied it to in like a lion, out like a lamb, and I tied it to daylight savings, whatever. And they both sucked. Nobody cared about them. So, like, whatever. We just wasted a couple hours of our life, and that's our job. So. Yeah, who knows? You know, it depends on so many things. Like, whatever, you know, I don't know.
Can I just say one thing before we end about advocating, like all of your little things? So, just to add something to the things that Claire says you should do for yourself that, you know, are easier said than done. But I just was in a position where for 2 years, I advocated and advocated and advocated, and we finally added somebody who's now just responsible for social and emails. And I was like, I do social, I do emails, I do marketing, I do communication. So I had like 10 jobs. And finally, July 1, we were able to get this person. And one of the things that I did, and I hadn't even really occurred to me until just your list, is that when I was complaining and when I was advocating for myself, I made sure to like tailor my message to the person I was talking to. So my boss, yes, of course, I'm like, this is terrible, oh my God. But then when I was like having lunch with our CFO, I was like, you know, paid advertising on Facebook and social media, you know, hits the bottom line, blah, blah, blah. And then it began to like create this sort of culture of like, it's not just posting cat day pictures, but it's actually going to affect things overall, and we need somebody who can actually manage that. It's not just like a thing I do at 9 o'clock at night. It's actually a real job that has real ramifications for the institution. And so when I was talking to various people who are part of this decision-making process of adding a human being to do this work, I was speaking to them in a way that it made, you know, it added value to the conversation, and it took 2 years, but she exists, and I haven't had to look at Instagram one time this week while I'm at this conference, which is actually kind of nice. So it's a success story. I know it's not going to work for everyone, but if you can take a little nugget of that as you're advocating for yourself and for our professional practice, I think that hopefully that helps. So I just wanted to add that at the end.
So to close the session, I have two things to say. One is that support, delegation, all those things are important, and you know, you are empowered to advocate for that kind of stuff, like having a support staff member and training them to do the job, or delegating the work to someone else. And having been in that situation and doing the job solo in-house myself, and now consulting on the like outside of museums, I really, really want to make it a personal goal to support all of you, whether you are able to hire me or if you want to, you know, put our brains together on campaigns and projects. I'd be happy to just collaborate with any and all of you. And then the last thing I wanted to say to Linda's point about sharing her viral mistake is that we all make mistakes, and we need to recognize that and understand that it's okay. Not everyone has a public platform to make their mistakes on, so we are in a unique position in that sense, but it happens to everyone, and they can be really bad mistakes or they can be minor mistakes, and they're all out there for the world to see, unfortunately, in our line of work. So yeah.
I'm not ashamed to admit that I used to be a social media manager for a science museum, and I one time tweeted giant hemorrhoid instead of asteroid. And it will haunt me for the rest of my days. Yeah. So put it on my tombstone. Anyways, thank y'all for coming today. Don't hesitate to reach out to us on social. I'm going to also plug if you are still on Facebook, we have an awesome museum social media managers group that has great feedback, ask questions, a huge group of people that can help you. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Do you have any last minute things?
No, okay. Oh, I made a typo during the Met Gala, so don't worry.
I tweeted a picture of my grandma at the Dodger game on Blackman's account.
Yeah.